He says, parents, seniors need to learn their lesson from this episode. Their obligation lies in giving a direction when their advice is sought. But the sad state of youngsters is that the elders, lacking adequate knowledge of life and living, shower incessant, unsought sermons upon them. However, the young would do well to keep their minds open, remain cool, and examine the advices given to them on merit. May seek wiser counsel when necessary and act on one's discerning intellect. There is no need to argue or lose one's temper. Let one of the parties observe this rule, there should be no problem whatsoever. If, however, both discard it and assert each one's views, there is bound to be conflict and chaos in their relationship. Okay, so this is harking back to what we were covering in the previous classes. Where there is a parent-child relationship, the parents are at the power end of the spectrum, and so there is a tendency to exercise that influence and that power indiscriminately. Because they can, they do. That sort of idea. So what happens is that giving advice, or to put it another way, telling what to do. Do this, don't do that. The problem with it is that it is a fundamental principle of education that knowledge is taken, it is not given. With the best intention in the world, you cannot give another person your knowledge. It's impossible. If you have a beautiful chicken salad, and you try to give it to me because you want to share it, I can't take it. I'm a vegetarian. As much as you want me to enjoy that beautiful meal, I simply cannot take it because I have no receptivity towards eating chicken. With all the goodwill in the world, you have beautiful ideas, you have a correct understanding of the child's nature, you know exactly where she needs to go to be healthy and happy. You cannot give her that information if she's not willing to receive it. Impossible. We're not saying you should not. It's not a possibility. We are also saying you should not. So imagine the same thing from the other perspective. Right? Remember what it was like to be a youngster perhaps in your own family. Or just imagine any scenario where you're in a situation where others are constantly telling you what to do. Micromanaging you at work, for example. Do this, don't do that. It's oppressive. It's a sense of restriction and constraint. What happens then is that any time that person, the parent, starts speaking, there's an immediate resistance. You tune out. There's a rebellion against the knowledge. And when they do need knowledge, there'll be a reduced tendency for them to come and get it. I know someone, for example, very well versed in this knowledge, like an encyclopedia. You would not believe it. Thoroughly impressive. But I know people who have said, I'd love to go and ask him, because I've got some doubts and some questions, but I know what's going to happen if I do. You get this avalanche of talking. You get this torrent of words and ideas. It's too much. It's forced. It's not being shared, it's being pushed. So think about it. Anytime we are trying to give another person knowledge to help them, it's something that we're sharing, right? We're giving it for their benefit, on their behalf, ostensibly. But when it's actually being done, the attitude that we often adopt is not, here is something valuable, I'm offering it to you. It's, I know what's right, and you should take it. It's being pushed onto the person rather than being offered outward. Right? And if it's being offered outward, then if the person's ready for it, they'll take it. Right? You offer someone else your beautiful chicken salad. Fantastic. I love chicken salad. They take it. And so if a person is not receptive to our ideas, the best we can hope for is to be ignored. Usually what happens is that there's an outright resistance. And then all of the good advice that you may have later on, it's ignored. It's rejected. You do the exact opposite of what you're being told to do. That's the rebellious tendency of the human mind. You push against it, it pushes back. It resists. Think of it this way. Every human being has a natural drive for freedom, for autonomy. We all want it. You know, when it's immature autonomy, it's I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. Right? When it's a more mature autonomy, you recognize that wherever you have freedoms, there are responsibilities that go with it, and so you have that you exercise your responsibilities in order to maintain your autonomy and so on and so forth. But whether it's a mature or immature autonomy, we all want that freedom to be authentic, to be who we are, to be unrestricted in our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. If someone tries to restrict your freedom, well, your natural innate drive for freedom will start to function, and you'll push back. You'll try to do whatever you can to get rid of that external influence. Now, when you're a child, if you're 8, 10 years old, you can't say to your parent, just shut up, will you? I'm busy. Leave me alone. When I want advice, I'll ask for it. Right? You can't say that. You don't have that stature. Nor do you often have the self-awareness even. And so all you can do is just clam up internally or just switch to a different frequency. I know someone who said that he learned when he was quite young to just tune out. It's like a radio receiver. I want to listen to 89.3, so you tune into that. This is a terrible station, so you tune out into something else. So that parent has that frequency, that emotional tone when they deliver their perfect knowledge. It's too much, you don't like it. What do? Tune out. Just switch the receiver around. Oh. Yep. Okay, yep. Gotcha. Totally tuned out. It's a good skill to learn. So this is what he says. We need to understand this, that don't give advice where it's not sought. Or to put it another way, youngsters learn by observing their superiors. Now, whether they're learning good habits or bad habits, that's what they're doing. If you grew up with smokers as parents, more likely you'll be a smoker. You learn those values by absorption. Now, it's not that the parents are saying, this is really good. There's some bad stuff to it, but this is a really good thing. It's so enjoyable. You should try it when you get older. But there's no education directly to the children to say smoke. It's indirect education. In the same way, when we are trying to convey knowledge of life and living to youngsters, if we possess it, then the way to do it is indirectly. Live it, and they'll just naturally pick it up. So what do you want your child to be? How do you want your child to live their life? Live that way yourself, as fully as you possibly can. And have self-development as a goal as well, so that you keep on advancing in those values. And if at all we do need to give information, remember that the more receptive a person is, the more directly it can be provided. As their receptivity drops away, you can't give it directly now. It's too confronting. Make it an indirect assertion. Give knowledge indirectly. But in order to do that, you have to be sufficiently detached and mature compared to the person you're speaking with so that they don't know it. If they become aware, here she goes, trying to be subtle, giving me indirect knowledge again, the whole conceit is revealed and it loses all of its effect. So you've got to be confident that you're actually, that far enough above the child to be able to do it. So when it comes to young children, it's much easier. As children's intellect starts to function, it's much easier for them to spot it. So that's the job of the parents, and he says the job of the youngsters is to remain cool and examine the advice given on merit. So how does the child remain cool? Yeah, it's all very well to say that the child should remain cool, but how would the child do it? It's much easier for the child to remain cool when they recognize this weakness exists in the parents. Forget that relationship, any relationship. If you're very clear, this person has got a tendency to get agitated when he talks about politics. He always gets himself completely wound up. If you know he's got that tendency, you'll quite happily have a discussion on politics with him. But when he gets wound up, here he goes again. So you're relaxed. He's got this tendency, he's got this weakness, here it goes. And so it doesn't affect you because you're seeing it for what it is. But you still listen to his political views. Actually, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Now, he's ranting like King Lear in the storm. But you're just able to filter out all of that and take what he's saying on merit. Just because someone is themselves delivering information in a way which is unpleasant or unpalatable doesn't mean that the information per se is to be discarded. But that's what we do. I don't like the way you're saying it, so I'm going to discard what you're saying. But if we can remain cool and objective, okay, the guy's kind of a nut job, but let's listen to what he's got to actually say. That's a good point. So we're doing ourselves a great service by being able to step back in that way. So educate your children on your weaknesses. Now, sometimes, honey, I'm going to be crazy, okay? But that doesn't mean I'm wrong. He says, hence, it is incumbent upon one to choose a field of activity according to the nature of one's vasanas. The vasanas would then support, accelerate the actions. But if one chooses a field alien to one's vasanas, then they will retard the actions. It is a phenomenon much like the tail or headwind affecting the speed of an aircraft. Where there is a tailwind, the plane moves faster than its own speed, and with a headwind, its speed is reduced. So this is a really good analogy. If we are functioning in a field of activity where we have a natural inclination towards it, then we take to those activities with enthusiasm. Right? And this is an interesting way to understand how we can become less result-oriented. Because if we are just doing it because we love it, then there's less of a tendency to want to grab a result at the end of it. Think about your hobbies. Right, so you've got your job, you've got your social job, maybe you're a parent or whatever. You've got a hobby that you do on the weekends, gardening or a musical instrument or something. You take to that naturally. You choose the hobby that is purely in line with your preferences. We're not going to be so concerned about our degree of proficiency in that activity because we're doing it for the love of the activity itself. And so if we align our field of study, and this is a really good example, if we align our field of study to our swadharma, then the study will be vastly improved because we would take to that study anyway. If I had some idle time, I'm surfing the internet, where do I go? Politico and The Hill and all these other political websites because I like politics. Well, then you should maybe think about studying politics. So you go with your nature. So you don't have to force yourself to read all of the readings. You actually want to read those readings. And it's beautiful because your obligation now falls in line with your preference. There's a good definition of heaven. Is when the thing that you have to do is the thing that you want to do. I have to read an essay about politics? Fantastic. Now, if you don't like politics, for some reason you've taken up a field of study in politics, well, I know that it'll get me famous. Oh, I've got to read 6 essays on politics. What a drag. What will be the effect on your study and your knowledge? Choose a field of study that is in line with your nature. Continue that as a field of activity through life. And then you just naturally take to those activities, those actions. So you get a natural internal propulsion into the activity without having to force yourself.